Hey guys, it's Mike. I'm just chilling here in the cantina. I just want to let you know that this episode of Bantha Fodder includes spoilers for virtually every single Star Wars movie there is. So if you haven't seen any of the Star Wars movies yet, or this is just your introductory to try and find out how to watch Star Wars, just make sure that you don't listen to this episode until after, because you'll ruin everything. You'll ruin everything. It'll be terrible. Oh my God, no! Okay. I guess everyone else enjoy the show. Welcome back to Bantha Fodder. My name is Mike Kamate. Joining me right now is Jacob Tender, our lovely and talented co-host. Jacob, say hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Yeah, we got episode 2 out there. This is episode 3.
And with that, what else did we get? We got our YouTube account reinstated.
Oh my gosh, Mike. I won't even go into the entire story. It's far too long-winded. Maybe I'll post a blog about it at some point, but honestly, I'm just stoked to have it back. Long story short, we had the episode 1 up as well as our teaser, and YouTube decided that for some reason they wanted to pull down not just a video but our entire account, really with no warning or reason. And after a few appeals and putting a couple bugs in the ears of some friends I know that are professional YouTubers, we ended up getting it back. So we're online. We have both episodes currently running live, and we're there. So the links to that will be in the menu of our website at banthafodder.fm. If you'd like to find that, you can subscribe to us on there, and you can listen there as well as in your favorite podcasting player of choice.
Any other news? Any other follow-ups from last episode that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, well, reaction episode 2 has been pretty good. We've had a lot of awesome listeners and a lot of awesome feedback. Really, really enjoying all of that, so keep it coming. As always, like we totally appreciate any feedback you can give straight to us or leave us on our iTunes page, in the form of a review. That kind of stuff really helps us out and gets us out there. There are a lot of Star Wars podcasts out there. I'm not sure if you knew that, Mike, but at my last count, there are just around 90 Star Wars podcasts on the iTunes store that I can find. So in order to stand out, anything helps.
Anything. Reviews, comments, hate mail, tweets, whatever.
Send it all to Mike. All of it.
Yes.
Yeah, but otherwise, let's check in with you, Mike. Have you watched Star Wars Alone yet?
Oh boy, I have not.
You have not?
No.
Oh.
And the backlash from last episode has been intense.
Tell me about that.
My loyalty as a Star Wars fan has been thrown into question amongst my circle of friends. I have a group chat of about 9 people, and they have all turned on me and cast me out as someone who is a fan of Star Wars. And it's a little heartbreaking. They can't envision a world with me in it. A person that doesn't want to, who can't bring himself to go to see Star Wars in theaters a second time. It's really difficult for me.
Interesting. So not only have you angered your podcasting co-host, but all of your other friends as well.
Right.
You're sort of a pariah.
Yeah. No. And there's only one way to remedy the situation. So the answer has to be going into theaters by myself and seeing The Force Awakens with no one else.
Well, that'll knock out 2 birds with 1 stone.
It will.
You'll make your friends happy because you'll see The Force Awakens in theaters twice, and with me, you'll have seen a Star Wars movie alone.
And will that make the counter on our website go away?
Quite possibly. As of now, it's been 13 days, 16 hours, 15 minutes, and 39 seconds since you were issued the challenge.
You were telling me yesterday that might be like the second most trafficked page on our website right now.
Yeah, for some reason. I don't have complete analytics as to what everybody's clicking from the show notes, just what's actually hosted on our own webpage. And since we host the Mike's Challenge countdown, or count up rather, I can tell you that the number of hits that we've had on that page alone have far exceeded the number of hits on each episode's show notes page. So that doesn't mean that more people are clicking on this link than are listening to our show. That just means more people are actually going to that page to see Leia in her incredulous look as she finds out that you have not seen Star Wars Alone. So you can check that out. You can check that countdown. I'll update that as soon as Mike checks in with a proper story about seeing it alone. And
it's got to be right.
We'll get you there, Mike. We'll get you there.
Okay. Do you know what we're talking about today?
No. Tell me, please.
We are going to be talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is Star Wars viewing order.
Explain.
Well, do you know what I mean by when I say viewing order? I said it to somebody last night, and they're like, "Oh, well, like, you just watch them 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, right?"
Right. I apparently there's some debate to that.
Well, I mean, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's like a Reese's cup.
Are we talking simply the order in which you watch the movies, or like the format of the movies themselves?
We are talking about the order in which you watch the movies, in which you consume them.
Okay.
First, I think it would help to just define some things right off the bat.
Okay.
One is the two ways that are considered the main ways to watch Star Wars. And the first is called release order, watching the films in the order they came out.
Okay.
And then the second option is episodic order, watching the films in the order George Lucas kind of intended for them, episodes 1 through 6. I refer to that also as chronological order. Okay. So just now that we've got that clear, we can proceed.
Well, I mean, for me, I've always sort of followed, I guess, what would be the release order. So episodes 4, 5, and 6, followed by 1, 2, 3, and now 7.
Have you ever considered watching them in episodic order? Episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
I may have watched them in episodic order once when I was a lot younger, but that hasn't been the way that I prefer it. Is there an advantage to that or a disadvantage?
Well, let me take you back on a trip down memory lane here.
Okay, hit me.
Long ago, to the time of 2008. I am a college junior. I am studying abroad in the beautiful city of London. And in that city, I have just started dating a girl, and I have discovered that she has never seen Star Wars before. I think we're 19, 20 years old. And I seize this opportunity. I say, "What do you know about this movie?" And she goes, "Oh, well, I mean, I know that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, but I really don't know anything else. There's a little green guy, Yoda, right? Who uses the Force or something like that." And and I just saw this as like a great time to experiment, which in hindsight was probably not the best idea because, cut to us, spending maybe a week or 2 weeks because we went to separate schools, so we only got to see each other a few days a week. And anytime we hung out, we're just hanging out in our dorm rooms watching Star Wars on laptop speakers, small, couldn't be more than 15-inch screen, and just watching them in episodic order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
So we watched the movies, and at the end of it, we find out that she enjoyed episodes 1, 2, and 3 more than episodes 4, 5, and 6.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Star Wars felt dated to her.
Okay.
The original. Yeah, like just the effects, the practical effects. It wasn't something she was used to. She liked the polished look of the prequel trilogy. And the 4, 5, and 6, she just couldn't really get into as much because of maybe what seemed like hokier acting or different style, slower pace, not as heavy action sequences, which is nothing that she should be, ashamed of or anything like that. Although it definitely did not go over well in my group of friends, as you would imagine from their reaction to me not wanting to see Star Wars twice in theaters.
Right.
After that girlfriend and I broke up, I remember getting a voicemail from a friend of mine that was the obligatory, "Hey man, shake it off" kind of thing. Don't worry about it. You're better off without her kind of thing. Except he really was focusing on the idea of her liking the prequel trilogy more than the original trilogy. It was something along the lines of like, "Can you envision a world where the mother of your children enjoyed episodes 1 through 3 more than episodes 4, 5, and 6? Can you imagine that?" And that was a really great way to put it in perspective. Maybe she wasn't the one.
They seem very protective.
They are very protective of their Star Wars. But yeah, it was something that was really interesting to try, and I think it said a lot about how episodic order works, and where it doesn't work as well too, which I can definitely elaborate on later. Do you have any opinion or any thoughts on how viewing order affects your interpretation of the movies?
maybe watching them in, episodic order, where you start with 1 and you go through 6, that it kind of changes the story up, in the way that we're familiar with it. Having seen the original trilogy beforehand, I think a lot of people, they get that big reveal of Darth Vader being Luke Skywalker's father. And while I don't think that's the most important part of the Star Wars trilogy, or at least the original trilogy, like, it's definitely like, it's a big moment. And it's definitely the most memorable moment from the original trilogy. So having watched the prequels now, I guess I can see that maybe watching episodes 1, 2, and 3 before watching 4, 5, and 6 would certainly sort of diminish that sort of reveal. It kind of actually eliminates it completely, because you find out very quickly that Anakin Skywalker is slowly becoming a Sith Lord and would then become Darth Vader. And having watched the movies now with my girlfriend, she saw the original trilogy first and then the prequels second. But she was still surprised at the end to see that Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader.
Really?
Yeah, and I mean, it's so hard for people who have seen the movies so many times to, I guess, maybe imagine how that could even be possible. But I mean, apparently it is. I guess you can go through the whole movie like realizing that Anakin Skywalker is becoming bad, and then you might in the back of your head know that he's supposed to be Luke's dad, and if you're not really thinking about it critically, you might just miss it. And then when they reveal it, it may still be a surprise, but I'd argue to say that it's not as much of a surprise as watching the original trilogy before the prequels. So I can see how the viewing order definitely plays a big part in sort of how the story is unfolded, and maybe even changes exactly what the emphasis of the story is. Like, is the story Luke's story, or is the story Anakin's story? I think that really gets changed up depending on which you start with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, as much crap as I gave my old girlfriend for liking the prequels more, she went into that awful experiment with just the right amount of knowledge to make the Vader reveal at the end of Revenge of the Sith enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I imagine it's really difficult to find someone who doesn't know that Vader is Luke's dad, regardless of having seen the films or not. That line...
No, I am your father.
It's so ingrained in our pop culture that you can't avoid spoiling the movie for yourself just by existing in our society. It's just going to be there at some point, parodied in some TV show or whatever. So that's something she knew going into the chronological marathon that we watched. But what she didn't know, and it's way easier to miss out on, is that Vader's real name is Anakin. And I think that's what you described your girlfriend as going through when she watched it.
Mm-hmm.
We went 3 entire films with her having no clue as to who Anakin Skywalker was. She obviously recognized the last name.
Right.
But seeing him start off as the little boy on Tatooine, it severed any connection she had to the villain that had been painted for her in the past 20 years, in various media.
Yeah.
That, and not having a defined timeline at the outset, you don't know when episode 1 starts. I mean, if you're a fan of Star Wars, you do. But if you've never seen this thing, you just don't know when Star Wars is setting.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like playing Knights of the Old Republic, the video game. It's you see a familiar name in that game, but you also are aware that this game takes place thousands of years before the Star Wars So you kind of have to disassociate. So just her seeing the name Skywalker, she's like, oh, Luke Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker, they're probably related somehow. You don't know when it's starting.
But you don't necessarily remember that tiny bit where they mention that Anakin, your father, right? You don't associate.
Yeah, well, she hasn't seen it yet.
Oh, right, yeah.
So she knew, she'd heard the soundbite before, but she had never heard
Anakin.
Yeah, Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, she'd never heard See, that's even just me saying that, that just proves, it's so hard. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
You can't, it's so hard to imagine watching it any other way. But I'm assuming that there is.
Yeah, and so when Vader gets turned up right on that operating table at the end of Revenge of the Sith, she had her reveal. It was more of a connection for her, but that was really nice. It just made the whole chronological viewing experiment somewhat worth it to see her be like, oh no.
You mean...
Don't say
right?
Watching it in chronological order, episodes 1 through 6, definitely ruined the Luke and Leia reveal. Absolutely.
Okay.
It also made their kiss, Luke and Leia's kiss on Hoth, like a definite WTF moment, you know, like,
oh yeah,
like you don't get any of that satisfaction of Luke winning out over Han. Like that scene, watching it, you know, for the first time, you're like, oh nice, Luke is like put his hands behind his head and he's just like, all right, like, but the audience in that case, if you've seen 1 through 3 already, you're kind of just like, oh man, that's just weird right there. That, because from the outset of, you know, Luke seeing the hologram of Leia, you're like, oh, that's his sister, and you're already getting the weird kind of incestual vibes, you know.
It is strange. It takes it from sort of like the nerd triumphing over the cool jock sort of guy, and then just flipping it into this weird incestuous sort of moment in the middle of the Star Wars saga.
Yeah.
That's so strange. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I don't know. This is like a little sidetrack, but I've thought about that moment a lot, and I still can't get over how weird it is.
Yeah, it is strange.
And we all just have to shrug and be like, yeah, no one knew.
Right.
You know, it's fine. Like, they could have known. But honestly, it might be the most realistically written action of any characters in the saga. You know, just like, you know, they don't know anything, and like, oh yeah, if like a beautiful woman kissed me in front of a jock, like I totally would have been like, haha, nice. Like no one knew. And then I mean think about it. Like she would totally kiss Luke to show up Han, you know, just to make him look stupid. But she totally wouldn't have kissed him if she knew he was her brother. But she didn't know he was her brother, so she kissed him, and no one ever speaks about it again. They just straight up forget about it. The Force just kind of passed over everyone, and it, like, Men in Black neuralized them all. The Force is like, this is a weird moment. I'm going to cloud all your brains, and that'll be it, you know? Oh, man. But yeah, viewing order, Luke and Leia is diminished. Knowing who Yoda is, you know, that's also kind of messed up by watching it in episodic order. You find out who Yoda is, and you also, I mean, you see him doing a lot of weird, like, acrobatic lightsaber fighting and stuff that you wouldn't expect out of, like, after watching the puppet in 4, 5, and 6.
I suppose that changes the outlook on him watching the original trilogy then later. You know, when we meet Yoda watching the original trilogy first, like, we're like, okay, who's this weird guy? Like, oh, he's going to take us to Master Yoda. And then they reveal it it's Yoda. But then I guess having known that he was Yoda to begin with, seeing the prequels first, you might just, you might take it in a different way. You might see it more, maybe even more comedic than that moment kind of already is. And then it might put the timeline into perspective, you know, because it shows you him in exile, and it shows you him sort of decrepit and old and sort of on his way out.
I think it's a similar vein to the Luke and Leia kiss. Like, the audience knows something that the characters don't know, whereas if you watch it in release order, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, then you'll automatically just be like, oh, you know, it's a surprise. You were right along with Luke in that ride of not knowing who to expect for Yoda. And, you know, I mean, that is why the clear answer is in the base mode of watching the movies, you know, is 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Episodic order is just not as enjoyable.
Yeah.
However, and this is a great however, and as many Star Wars fans, I'm sure, know at this point, there is an alternative to watching it in release order.
I'm interested.
Well, have you heard of what's known as Machete Order?
Nobody knows Machete.
I've heard of this. To be honest, I haven't looked it up. But I have heard of this, you know, floating around and mentioned in different blogs.
I'm surprised.
Well, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't really looked into viewing order differently because I've always felt that the way to watch it is in the release order. So what's the advantage of the Machete Order over episodic or release order?
Well, I feel like first we have to give credit where credit is due when discussing Machete Order. I mean, all of the info I'm about to spill is kind of the paraphrased writings of someone named Rob Hilton. He's a software developer from Colorado. He's got this blog called nomachetejuggling.com, hence the name Machete Order, where he talks a lot of programming, along with the occasional Star Wars post that kind of explodes his web traffic.
Yeah. I'm looking at this now, actually. It's almost 5,000 words long. This was, for context, it's called The Star Wars Saga Introducing Machete Order. It was posted in November of 2011, actually 11/11/11. It is almost 5,000 words long, and there have been over 1,000 comments on this blog post alone. And it seems to be the only Star Wars related thing just based on this first viewing of this blog. So how did this come about, and why is it so big?
That's the thing I love about Rob, is that in a December 2015 post, right after The Force Awakens came out, he admitted that he's not really a Star Wars person. He's just more of a film geek. He didn't see the original movies until he was 17, which gives him a great, and I guess a unique perspective on how bad or good any part of the saga actually is. He's not blinded by the nostalgia of the original trilogy, and it makes it easier for him to recognize the good parts of the prequels.
Okay.
And I really love that. I just think it's a really, really great way to look at the films.
So he came out with this blog post with his proposed watching order called Machete Order. What exactly makes it so different from the existing ways of watching the movie?
Well, Machete Order is actually a derivative of what's called Ernest Rister Order, which admittedly I couldn't find a primary source for, just a lot of secondary ones. Like it links them to IGN, I guess. I'm not sure, though.
Okay.
If someone could school me on the history of the Ernest Rister Order, please tweet angrily at me.
That's a great name.
Yeah.
It's like a Star Wars name itself.
It looks like it. It's missing a vowel even in most of the versions that I see, so I think it's very Star Wars. Anyway, Ernest Rister, whoever he may be, seems to be the guy who figured out that, contrary to what George Lucas might say, Star Wars is, and always was, the story of Luke Skywalker. Which is, you mentioned that earlier, just being like, which way do you look at Star Wars? As the story of Luke or as the story of Anakin? And for that reason, it doesn't make sense to watch it in release order if you look at it as Luke's story, because you finish Luke Skywalker's story, discounting The Force Awakens, obviously, and then you jump back in time and end on a really, really bleak note in Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
And it doesn't make sense to watch it in episodic order, like I did when torturing my poor old girlfriend, because you go 3 whole movies without meeting Luke, and the change from Anakin Skywalker to Vader is such a polar shift. Not to mention a poorly executed one, that it's almost impossible to think of Vader as Anakin in the original trilogy.
Interesting.
So what does the mysterious Ernest do? You introduce Vader, then you introduce Luke, leave everyone at the end of Empire Strikes Back feeling really bad and in shock from saying, man, Vader is Luke's dad. That is insane. How could that be? And then you jump back.
What do you mean?
Well, episodes 1, 2, and 3, you watch those right after episodes 4 and 5. Then you flash forward, you're at the Return of the Jedi, and you know all about the tragedy of Darth Vader and why it's so important that Luke turns him back to the light side.
Oh, so rather than making them prequels, you make them flashbacks.
Right.
Very long political flashbacks.
Well, we won't talk about the quality of those, but that's Ernest Rister Order. Now, Machete Order is the derivative of that, and what that does is it takes that Ernest Rister Order of 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6, and it chops off episode 1. You get rid of episode 1.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of makes sense.
Right. Well, why does it make sense to you?
It makes sense to me because episode 1, while it introduces Anakin as like a young person sort of finding his way into the Force and becoming a Jedi, it's not really that important. There's really nothing in that movie that can't be, explained somewhere else in episodes 2 and 3. So apart from being picked up by Qui-Gon Jinn, who I think in his own way is a very important character to the series, like, we really don't need all of the politics that are set up at that point. We don't need the pod race. We don't need like a third verification that Anakin Skywalker is a good pilot. Like, all of those things can be proved at some point in episodes 2 and 3. So I can totally see why lobbing off episodes 1 would kind of be beneficial. Yeah,
and the upside for me, it spares me from having to rewatch a movie. God, I hate doing that. But no, seriously though, there is a downside to it. Purists might not be able to sacrifice the idea of 2 separate trilogies. It kind of takes away that whole idea. It makes it more like a 5-film series, and you kind of just forget about episode 1.
Right.
One area that Machete Order can fall short on, as Rob Hilton points out in his update FAQ to Machete Order, is the idea of Force Lightning not being a surprise anymore. So do you remember the Force Lightning from Return of the Jedi?
Right.
So when that happens, if you're watching it 4, 5, and 6, you're just watching Emperor Palpatine just kind of just shoot this lightning out of his hands, and you're like, that dude is so evil that he just makes lightning come out of his fingers. That's ridiculous.
It's pretty badass.
But if you watch it in Machete Order, you watch episodes 4 and 5, still no Force lightning. Jump back to 2 and 3, and you just see Count Dooku using it first. So it becomes kind of like, yeah. And as Rob Hilton points out, it's kind of the video gamification of Force lightning. It's like a power that you get in pretty much every Star Wars video game where you play as a Jedi. Just like an upgradable thing. And it becomes something that's not unique to Palpatine. And that is kind of a bummer, because you don't get that effect of like, you're like, oh, I guess Palpatine's doing the Force lightning thing again. Okay. It's still pretty brutal, but at the same time, it kind of takes that, oh, that dude is so evil. Like that whole thing there.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of things like that in there. I think you're going to miss out on a lot of the little nuances that they sort of that they stick into the prequels that we kind of take for granted because we've seen the original trilogy already. If you've already seen the OT and you're watching it in chronological order now, that stuff's not going to surprise you. And I think they sort of take it for granted, and they're like, okay, well, this is something that's already existed in the Star Wars universe before, but we're going to stick it in here, for this guy now instead, and he's going to have this power too. And you're like, okay, well, that's kind of cool. Like, it shows that Palpatine isn't the only one that has that ability, but, I guess that could kind of ruin it for those who eventually get to Palpatine using it in the very last of the first 6 movies. And yeah, it's sort of a drag, but that's what you get. It's the trade-off.
But I think the benefits definitely outweigh the downsides to it.
Yeah, all of the critical plot points are there. What you're really taking out is like sort of the less important details, like maybe midichlorians, which are never mentioned ever again.
Mm-hmm. Well, you keep Luke and Leia, right?
Right.
You go through you finish Empire Strikes Back and then Flashback, and then you get the Luke and Leia reveal at the end of 3.
Okay.
But then you get it's reaffirmed right at the end of episode, towards the end of episode 6. Uh-huh. You get the Yoda reveal because you go through Empire without having seen Yoda yet, and you get the I am your father
from the original trilogy.
Exactly.
I can see all the benefits of this.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Okay. Really though, it's the Vader father twist that has to take precedence over any of the other twists. Watching an episodic order, you miss out on sharing that revelation with Luke. Rob Hilton from No Machete Juggling, he linked to this video in his post. It's a compilation of kids' reactions to the Vader father reveal. Mm-hmm. It's adorable. We'll put it in the show notes. I didn't think I'd make it through all 5 minutes of this thing, but if there's anything that will drag the nostalgia out of you, it's going to be watching someone deny Luke's parentage right after it's directly stated in the film. There's just so many kids who are echoing Luke's name, like, no, he's not true. Yeah, there's tons of kids doing that. Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's Machete Order.
Interesting. Okay, so tell me, have you watched it in this way?
I am in the middle of a viewing of this right now, but I'm not watching it alone. So
dang it!
Don't get your hopes up.
I thought for sure.
Nope. My girlfriend and we just finished Empire Strikes Back, and we're moving to Attack of the Clones.
Okay.
Whenever she feels ready to stomach it, we're gonna do Attack of the Clones.
Okay. So you're about midway through.
We're considering on how to watch it, because I could just toss on the Red Letter Media reviews and in place of the prequels, and I would probably feel better about that. Or I could just try and find a good fan edit of 2 and 3.
Okay.
Because it does still feel weird, though, to chop off episode 1, I get the reasons why. It totally makes sense to me, and I'm not a fan of that film. But again, you and I have discussed this before, that it's definitely not the worst of the prequels, so it feels kind of weird to chop that off,
I think it's a fine movie, but I think what this Machete Order is really trying to get at is giving you the plot points in the best possible way. And if episode 1 doesn't deliver any truly important plot points, why watch it?
Exactly. Well, it also turns the focus on Luke. It really just makes it Luke's story. And keeping that in mind, the placement of episode 7 now becomes really interesting to think about. If you look at Machete Order and think of it as the way to highlight Luke's journey, The Force Awakens takes a really interesting turn there, because you don't know where you want to put that. If you're thinking of 4, 5, 2, 3, 6 as your Machete Order there,
Okay.
where would you place The Force Awakens?
I mean, I would place it after. I don't see why I would have to. Because I feel like Machete Order is sort of trying to make sense of the prequels in maybe a more solid way, in a way that fits better with the story that people actually seem to care about. And I don't see how The Force Awakens really goes against that story. I think it's a pretty good extension of that story, so I would probably just keep it where it is, and I would watch it after Jedi.
Well, I mean, again, remember what I said before about the purity of trilogies, how that kind of gets discarded when you think about Machete Order. What if we discarded the idea, just for the moment, because we know that there's going to be an episode 8 in, what is it, December of 2017 at this
17?
point?
Yeah.
So we know there's going to be an episode 8, but imagine right now that it's self-contained, and what we have is all we have.
Okay.
And all we'll get. So what if we took episode 7 and placed that at the forefront of the Machete Order prior to A New Hope? We're flashing sideways here. You know, we're doing some pretty ridiculous.
That's 3 levels of flashbacks then, or 2 levels of flashbacks. If we're starting the series in the time of The Force Awakens, then there would be a flashback, I'm assuming, after, you know, the Luke reveal at the end of The Force Awakens.
Absolutely.
There would be a flashback to the beginning of Luke's story. And then through Luke's story, there would be a flashback to the beginning, midway through what we now know is the Anakin story. At what point does it end? Is there? At some point, I want to flash back to the beginning of Jar Jar's story.
No, you do
somewhere
not,
in the middle of the
do not
prequels,
say that.
and then in there, I want to learn about what Boss Nass was like as a child. So keep on going.
No, this is the story of Luke, right?
Okay.
Granted, it is a lot of jumps, and you're right. You know, the gut reaction is probably the best reaction here. Toss it in at the end, you know, and we go for the next trilogy from there. But how cool is it though to think about, you know, like you meet Luke, no dialogue at the end of Force Awakens, just hood comes off, blank or not a blank stare, pretty heavy stare at Rey, and then you know, we jump back and we see Luke as a child. And
it certainly makes Luke an important person.
The most important person.
Like, if you were to watch the movies in that order, it would make him the most important person, but it's still a flashback within somebody else's story. And with The Force Awakens, I think that story is Rey's. So then it would make this Machete Order Rey's story rather than Luke's. A majority of the story would be Luke's, but we'd be remembering that all of this is a flashback in Rey's story.
Well, that's you incorporating episodes 8 and 9, which we assume will be about Rey as well, into this. So what I'm saying is that you are right. Episode 7 goes at the end, if we are to include 8 and 9. But what if you just took episode 7 on its own right now and imagined that was the episode 1 of this trilogy, you know? Like, what if we...
That would be interesting.
Yeah, and because it still keeps it Luke's story, we're framing it with something else that's outside of Luke's story. This goes off into like a rumor tangent, you know, but what happens in episode 8? What if something happens to Luke Skywalker in episode 8, you know, and he dies? What we could consider that the end. And what if we did 7, 4, 5, 2, 3,
Good
6,
Lord.
8? One other thing you get from possibly putting episode 7 at the forefront of Machete Order is the idea of kind of what comes across in the novelization of The Force Awakens, something you were discussing with me a while back when you were first pushing through that novelization. The idea that when Finn and Rey are looking for a ship to escape Jakku with, when they look at that clunker, they go, oh, look, we have to get on that, you know, and they run onto it. The audience watching the movie knows that is the Millennium Falcon, but the characters don't.
Right.
So when you were talking about the novelization where these two characters, you know, you don't really understand that they're on the Millennium Falcon until Han Solo boards it and they define it as the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, it totally plays with, like, the expectation. Like, in the movie, obviously, it's a big sort of, like, visual reveal.
Fan service,
Anybody who it's fan service. Anybody who sees the Millennium Falcon when they turn that corner and head towards the pile of junk that they didn't want to take initially, like, they're like, oh, like, holy shit, that's the Millennium Falcon. But in the book, what you get is a little different. Like, they're running towards the ship, and Finn, I think it's Finn, like, reads basically on, like, I don't know if it's a license plate or, you know, it's some just, like, plaque on the side of it, but he reads the words, my, am I, and then Khan, C-O-N, and he has no idea what that means. And, you know, Rey sort of dismisses it because, like, they're getting shot out. Why the hell are they reading? Like, you know, they get in the ship and they fly away. And it's not until later when Han Solo gets on the ship that they actually figure out that they're on the Millennium Falcon. And that's like, oh, wow, like, that's awesome. You know, you get the whole, like, you know, Chewie, we're home thing, and that's when the reveal happens in the book, which I think is fun. I think that's more fun because it, you know, you in your own head as you're, you know, visualizing the scene, they're just getting on some ship. And if you don't put it together from the MyCon, which, like, you know, if you're not really thinking about it, why would you put that together? It's sort of, there's an amount of time that goes by before they actually figure out where they are, before the reader figures out where they are. And that's cool.
Right.
I love when something like that happens in a book.
Well, what if you could take that feeling and I feel like putting episode 7 at the beginning of Machete Order would give you that. Maybe it's not worth it in the long run because of the trilogy that is to follow, episodes 8 and 9. But you still would. I mean, what happens for someone who's never seen Star Wars before that looks over and sees the Millennium Falcon in that scene? They don't have the reaction that the audience probably did when you saw the movie. You know, where everyone's like, "Oh my gosh!"
I don't think it at that point it's even a moment. I think they just, you know, that's just them getting on another ship that maybe not as good, and like that the reveal of it being Han Solo's ship happens then fairly soon after. Then they just wouldn't know really who Han Solo is. There's passing references in The Force Awakens, but I think it sort of diminishes the role of the Millennium Falcon if you watch it that way.
For sure. But it does give you that effect the book gives you for a second at least. And that's kind of a cool little bonus there.
I don't know, man. As I'm pretty down with Machete Order. Just reading through this blog post as we've been recording, I can totally see the benefits of this, but I don't know if I want to get any of the new movies involved.
No. I mean, to be clear, Rob Hilton definitely says it goes after in bold text. Like in his update blog, it definitely says Episode 7 goes after, but he does entertain the idea of Episode 7 going at the beginning because it is a great framing point, you know, to say like. I mean, the opening crawls create a really easy out for anybody who believes in Machete Order because episode 2, Attack of the Clones, just opens up with, it says exactly what's going on. It has no mention of anything that's happened in episode 1 that matters, you know, and it catches you right up. You know, there's a clone army happening and Count Dooku is doing some stuff. You just know right off the bat, you know, what's going on.
Yeah.
Nothing in episode 1 matters. And that's how these crawls work. And so if you took the crawl from episode 7, then, I mean, it kind of just says what's going. Luke Skywalker is missing. Who's Luke?
Missing, right.
And so if you're seeing Star Wars for the first time, imagine that Luke Skywalker is a brand new person to you. Well, who's this Luke Skywalker, this mysterious Luke Skywalker? And then launch into this really convoluted flash forward, flash sideways, flashback.
Well, I mean, I think for anybody watching The Force Awakens before they've seen any other Star Wars movie, which I think a lot of people are doing, I think most people know that Luke Skywalker is somebody important from before, you know, just going into the movie, just from pop culture alone. But for those who don't know that, I think they get the impression that he's somebody very important just based on what the other characters are saying about him, what they're kind of like. They treat him as a myth, you know, some sort of legend, like this legendary hero of the war. And I think they definitely impress upon the viewer just how important Luke is to the story. But I think anybody who's interested in that is going to go back and watch the older movies anyway. And maybe you can toss in, you know, Machete Order as the way that they go back and watch those. But I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know if... Again, I don't know if I subscribe to the Machete Order with the new movies, but I can definitely see the benefits of the Machete Order with the existing 6 that we got before The Force Awakens. You know, just reading through this post here, like, I'm looking at a section that he labeled What Works Best, and he's talking about, like, the real value of the Order and what really brings it all together in Return of the Jedi. And he talks about the scene where Luke, you know, he sees the vision in the cave on Dagobah, that he turns into Darth Vader, and then later we find out that he's his father in Empire. Then we watch the prequel episodes to kind of get a feel for who Anakin is and you know, what he becomes. And then when we skip back forward to Jedi, look at the scene where he goes into Jabba's palace, you know, initially hoping to rescue Han. There's like a musical cue, and, you know, Rob says it sounds a lot like the Imperial March, and the way he enters, the light behind him, you're really not sure exactly who it is. It sort of looks like this dark, imposing figure. He's got a cloak on, kind of like the Emperor. And then when you see him and you find out like exactly who it is, you see him force choking Jabba's guards. And there have been some really great posts and podcasts about, the possibility of Luke turning to the dark side. A lot of these were coming out before The Force Awakens actually made its debut. Just people sort of theorizing, maybe Luke is the bad guy this time around, and how interesting would that be? And you kind of see some of that, like in Return of the Jedi. At this point, Luke has sort of come into his powers, and he's sort of learned to become a Jedi on his own in training. But when he confronts Jabba, he's making threats. He's, using violence to make his way in. And I think it shows pretty clearly that without, proper training and proper guidance, Luke is sort of on the way to the dark side. And we'll see how that kind of plays out after The Force Awakens, when we sort of get more of an idea of what he did after the Empire fell. But I think Machete Order is awesome for kind of highlighting just exactly how similar he is to his father, and how there is potential for him to do wrong, even though he's sort of the hero of our story and the main good guy as far as we know him.
You know what it really makes me think of is, I'm not sure if you're a gamer or if any of our listeners are gamers. I assume there's some crossover there. Makes me think of Metal Gear Solid. And
okay.
Have you ever played that game?
No, I'm aware that the main character is named Solid Snake, but apart from that, I don't know a thing.
I mean, the history of Metal Gear Solid, it involves a really, really convoluted timeline of jumping back and forwards between one guy whose name is Solid Snake and one guy whose name is Big Boss. And I think it's odd because the latest games have all been Big Boss based, which is they're all flashbacks. And it's just, that's what it makes me think of, is just that kind of timeline. And that's actually off-putting to me. Yeah, jumping back and forth, it just really, it takes a lot away from the viewing experience, I feel like.
I can see how that could be really jarring, especially if, someone's watching episodes 4 and 5 and they're like, hey, this is pretty good. So they keep going. And then they watch episodes 2 and 3 and they're like, you know what? I don't really like this. This isn't that great. And then, maybe they drop off and they quit watching before they even get to episode 6, which I think is an awesome sort of, end to that trilogy. It sort of ties everything up, and I think it has a really great resolution. But who knows? Maybe if people were to watch this Machete Order for their first time viewing of Star Wars, they wouldn't get all the way through.
I don't feel like either of us will ever get an accurate idea of how well Machete Order works, unless, you involve your children or something like that down the line, because we've already seen everything. So we're going to be looking at everything with a very critical eye, whereas somebody seeing it for the first time is just going to be trying to take in all that information. And I don't know. It's I guess maybe just Star Wars is not a great thing to experiment with.
Or maybe it is.
It might be, but I mean, think about how I affected my old girlfriend's interpretation of Star Wars,
True. Yeah, you only get to watch it for the first time once.
Exactly. And I showed it to her in episodes 1 through 6, and because of that, she couldn't deal with episodes 4, 5, and 6.
I think at the end of the day, everybody is going to take what they want from Star Wars. I think some people are going to really enjoy it. Sometimes it takes a little while for them to come around. My girlfriend really came around to it, and she really enjoys the movies now, and she wants to go see the new one again. And I think that's great. And some people just might not get it. Some might not be able to look past, some of the corny science fiction from 1970 and sort of, I don't know, disregard it for what most people get out of it. They might just look at it as a corny sci-fi flick, and that's fine. That's okay. Not everybody's going to like Star Wars. I would never try to force anybody to like anything. That's not going to help anybody at all. But I think it is fun to kind of play with the viewing order, because the story is sort of, it's set, but it's fluid in the way that you present it. And I think a lot of people are unhappy with the way that George Lucas unfolded the story of Anakin Skywalker. And, I think that fans sort of have the right to put that story together the way they want to. And I think Machete Order is sort of awesome. So I'm definitely going to try it. Next time I watch the full saga, I'm going to watch it in Machete Order and, see what I get and see what I don't get, because I'm sure there are things that are missing just from leaving out episode 1 alone. Like, off the top of my head, how am I supposed to know that he built C-3PO? And that's not an important part to the story, but there are little nuances like that over time I've come to sort of enjoy, and I won't get if I don't watch that movie. But that's fine. It's all fun. I think you can grab something from Star Wars or pick up on something new every time you watch it, and especially if you change the order up and you sort of flip expectation on its head, you might get something different out of it that you just wouldn't have found before.
Well said. Well said.
Just from talking about this, I would love to do an episode based on fan edits. We're talking about the existing movies the way they are and watching them in different order, sort of in a fan's sort of created way. But there's so much to talk about just in the way of fan-created Star Wars edits, where you're editing down movies, you're editing things out of movies, and I think we could do an entire episode on that. What do you think?
I would love to do that, because I think that Machete Order can be modified.
Yeah.
I think it's totally alterable. I think maybe you don't have to get rid of episode 1. Maybe you could drop in the Phantom Edit in place of that. So do 4, 5,
right.
1, 2, 3, but do the Phantom Edit, or Topher Grace's edits, or anything like that. Any of those edits that are out there, or maybe just even inserting like the belated media plot points, into there. There's so many ways that you can modify Machete Order, but I do think it is the optimal viewing experience. I think that is the best way to do it. And if I could go back to that dorm room in London back in 2008, I would definitely do it again, but with 4, 5, 2, 3, 6 order as opposed to episodic.
I think this is great, and anybody who's listening to this now, stay tuned. We'll probably have an episode on fan edits sometime in the future. If there are any particular fan edits you'd like us to talk about, definitely hit us up on Twitter, or leave a comment on the YouTube if that's where you're watching now. We'd love to hear about it. I think we'll definitely talk about the Phantom Edit, like you mentioned. We'll talk about Harmies to specialized editions, probably at length. I could go on and on about those. So if you have any other ones that you'd like us to talk about, or things that we may not be even aware of, hit us up. Let us know. I'd love to kind of flesh those out and find the best of the fan edits.
Nice.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening to episode 3 of Bantha Fodder. We'd love if you shared your feedback with us. You can do that on Twitter. We're at Mike Comite and at Curbside Audio. You can find the show page at Bantha Fodder FM. We'll have the links to all that in the show notes, and you can find those show notes at banthafodder.fm/episode/3. If you get a second, hit us up on iTunes. Give us a review, leave a couple stars, tell us what you liked about the show, what you didn't like about the show, what you'd like to see in the future of the show. And recommend us in Overcast as well if you use that app. Next week, I think we're going to be talking about Weapon of the Jedi. So if you want to follow along with us, it's a really short read. Only takes a couple hours. It's a young adult novel, so go ahead and hit that up. Otherwise, say goodbye, Mike.
You should take a picture of how you're recording right now.
I would, but I'm not wearing pants.